I want to welcome our next two presenters. And so we have Dr. Eric Buder and Amy Hess. And so I'll be introducing them and welcome them to our symposium today. So Dr. Eric Buder serves as Section and Division Chief of Psychology at the Department of Pediatrics at The Ohio State University College of Medicine. Dr. Buder is also the director and founding faculty member of Nationwide Children's Child Development Center, which is an interdisciplinary program offering multiple medical subspecialties, including developmental pediatrics, neurology, psychiatry, gastroenterology, as well as psychology, social work, marriage and family counseling, speech and language therapy, and genetics counseling. His research is focused on the biomedical correlates and potential etiologies of autism spectrum disorders and ADHD, as well as psychological and medical treatment of these disorders. He is currently the principal investigator for several medical network grants and federally funded research studies focusing on pediatric behavioral health conditions, health service delivery, pediatric dental care, and quality improvement science. Amy Hess is the behavioral health outreach supervisor for Nationwide Children's Hospital, focusing on building learning health networks, primary care engagement, education, and community outreach for autism and other health categories locally and nationally. Amy is the coordinator for Nationwide Children's Hospital Project ECHO, designed to provide knowledge-based training to healthcare partners within and outside of Ohio. Amy is a family advisor for Nationwide Children's Hospital and the co-chair for the Autism Speaks Autism Treatment Network, working closely with the Autism Learning Health Network, focusing on quality improvement initiatives to build capacity for healthcare professionals in the care and treatment of individuals with autism. I've gotten to know Dr. Buder and Amy for many, many years and worked alongside them as we've all continued to learn and to grow together. I've had the pleasure of learning both alongside Amy, along with Amy around her son, as she is also the parent of a young adult with autism, and I'm sure she'll share potentially about that as well. So for the next 45 minutes, Dr. Buder and Amy will talk about RUBI Parent Training for Challenging Behaviors. They are esteemed colleagues and also phenomenal partners and innovators in their own right. So we are delighted to have them, and I'm going to turn over the microphone to Dr. Buder and Amy.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. It's such a joy to be here and want to really just show our appreciation for Echo Autism communities inviting us to present here. I've been looking forward to this. I think when we originally said that we're going to do this, our hope was that we would actually be together, but we're probably just a few months shy of being able to be together. At any rate, nothing like Echo Autism communities to be able to do something virtually and to do it meaningfully and do it well. Amy, anything you want to say before I get started?
No, I think it's been great to work with many of you on this team and to work in the field of challenging behaviors with children. So I'm really excited to talk about this. And Kristen did reference she has been along this journey with me and actually got to see me go through a pretty significant behavioral issue with my child one day while she was trying to do work and I was falling apart in the office next to where we were. So it's great to see that we've made progress in many areas since then.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, no one has done more for autism and the dissemination of best practices than Kristen Soul. So it's really an honor to be here in her shadow and what she's built with Echo Autism. And just thank you so much, Kristen, for the work that you've done. Before we get on to our first slide, let me just tell you a story. Once upon a time, many, many, many years ago, maybe in a galaxy far, far away, in a time when email was the most technological thing we had, right? Can you imagine that? Before Zoom, before Facebook, it was just email. Well, you used to have to write grants, research grants, and photocopy them 5 or 6 or 7 times, stack them on a table. If it was a big grant, and I'm talking about a grant the size of a stack like this, you usually had to put it in a big box, and then you had to send it off to Bethesda, Maryland to get the National Institutes of Health to review it. Well, we wrote a grant back in 2000, 2001 that was just like that before we really had electronic submissions. And sure enough, like all things, we were working to the deadline. And that deadline for us was it had to be on the doorsteps of NIH in Bethesda, Maryland from Columbus, Ohio at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning. we were still writing the grant at 11:30 p.m. the night before, but we were committed to get this grant in. We had to hire a chartered flight to fly it down to DC and get it over to Bethesda. We did get the grant submitted at great cost, but it was our first attempt at trying to get research for what would later become RUBI Parent Training. It was a peak academic experience for me. I was a young fellow working with people in the autism field, like Susan White, or Kieran Beers, or Luke LeCavalier, as we were putting this project together. I wish I could tell you the story ended really well related to that grant, but we didn't get funded. So we didn't get to do our project back then. But with all good things come up in turn, and eventually we did get a research project funded, and we got the start of this parent training program developed. And then good science after good science after good science has led us to, gosh, 20 years later, having an evidence-based treatment that we're ready to disseminate. If you've heard this before, it's worth underscoring. Once a treatment is ready to disseminate, it takes another 17 years to get it out into practice. ECHO, what Kristen's shown us with ECHO Autism, can change that to a matter of months, not 17 years. And so that's the big idea here. How do you use ECHO and the Learning Collaborative platform, the energy and the culture of ECHO, and the spirit that ECHO Autism Communities has grown across the globe? How do we use that to disseminate evidence-based treatments for kids with autism so that these treatments spread far and wide fast? Since it takes so long to develop them and it takes just as long to disseminate them, can we shrink that time? And so even though we're talking about RUBI today, I would encourage anyone to be thinking about other ways in which evidence-based treatments can be disseminated. So thank you for your time and attention over the next 42 minutes or so. We have a lot to say. I'll probably be moving fast. Our goals, Amy, if you want to move to the next slide, are not necessarily to teach you how to do RUBI, or definitely not even to teach you how to do ECHO RUBI. Our goal is to make sure you understand what parent training offers families, and a model of what that parent training could be is in ECHO RUBI, and hope that you can appreciate the basic introduction that we'll offer about RUBI today. Hopefully we'll whet your appetite. You'll want to learn a lot more. But the real hope for me is that you appreciate how we are trying to disseminate this through ECHO, and ways in which we really think that ECHO RUBI can help RUBI be integrated into general clinical practice. Let's go to the next slide. The wonderful thing about being in an autism learning environment is I don't have to teach anyone about autism, but just so that we're all on the same page, just to be thinking a little bit about what we're trying to address and treat here. The core symptoms of autism that the DSM-5 give us, that Leo Kanner identified, that Asperger's elaborated upon, that we've all been working with over the course of the last 60, 70 years, are not necessarily the treatment targets in RUBI. In RUBI, we're trying to address the co-occurring conditions, the disruptive behaviors, the tantrums, the irritability, the mild self-interest behavior, the mild aggressive behaviors, the resistance, the non-compliance, the inattention, maybe the anxiety, that sometimes are passengers on the same bus with autism. Along the way, if we are able to make dents and improvements in some of the core features of autism spectrum disorder, that's a bonus. And the other real bonus that we get out of RUBI is we begin to expand developmental skills and competencies as well. Next. Sometimes I like to just touch on a few real case stories from my own clinical experience of doing RUBI parent training over these years. One case is the case I call the alternative interior design. This is a mom who participated in one of our clinical trials. Mom and grandmom, they invited me to their house for a home visit. Home visits can be a part of RUBI. Now that we're doing so much by telehealth, you're pretty much in everyone's home every session. But when I went to this home, I saw that they had a lot of really interesting ways in which they hung the family pictures and the artwork. Mom was also a painter. So a lot of beautiful artwork in this house. The house was pristine. It's kind of house that had plastic on the furniture. Really just gorgeous home. It was a newer build home out in one of our rural communities. It was actually a double wide trailer home, but just absolutely pristine housekeeping that this grandma and mom had. And they had this 8-year-old boy, but really odd ways they hung their pictures. There was a picture hung down low by the baseboard, another picture hung high up near the ceiling, but close to the edge of a bunk bed. It was the strangest placements. And I thought, well, mom's an artist, maybe there's a reason why she's doing this. And I asked, oh, a really interesting way you've hung your art. And she said, well, let me show you what we're doing. And she pulls off one of the pictures, and there's a big hole in the wall. And what I learned at that point was that my patient was banging his head against the walls, and he was putting holes in the wall. And their way of covering up those holes was hanging these pictures. The positive outcome here for this patient and this family was that by the time we finished RUBI Parent Training, they were in a place where they could patch their holes, hang their pictures where they wanted. And this young man was no longer banging his head against the wall and putting holes in the wall. Lots of other really interesting and good success stories came out of this family. It's uncomfortable for me to say this, but as a part of the story, they were a religious family, a Christian family. And at the last session, they brought me a statue of Jesus, and they said, you have been my savior. Of course, I reframed that. I'm not your savior. You have saved yourselves, and you've learned how to parent in an extraordinary way for some extraordinary behaviors that your child has given you. Real quick, just a couple other case stories that show you some depth of how we use RUBI Parent Training. I had another little boy. He was highly verbal, achieving pretty well in school, had a DSM-4 diagnosis of Asperger's disorder. He was hyper focused on all things related to scouting and all the badges that he could get, all the camping trips he can go on. He loved bossing around littler scouts or Cub Scouts. He was everything about it, was obsessed with this. But he had severe disruptive behaviors. And anytime he was frustrated with a goal, he would have significant tantrums, self-injury, and even mild aggression towards siblings. This is a little guy who came through behavioral parent training, through the parent training program in one of our research trials with sort of wonderful outcomes, no behavior problems that persisted. Later on in development, family came back periodically. We would have 2 or 3 sessions, and they would be off to go again and be able to reincorporate the skills they learned earlier in RUBI Parent Training. They were able to address new behaviors with those with just a little bit of help, and sometimes not even enough help. And the last case, just to highlight a little bit of family factors and how we manage those in RUBI Parent Training. This is a situation where I had a mom and dad who were highly committed. They came in every week. They learned the content. They developed personalized homework assignments. They watched the videos we show them during RUBI Parent Training sessions, answered the questions well and correctly, and then they would go home and they would implement their homework assignment and come back with a homework assignment. But every weekend, grandma visited. And grandma just did not believe in any of this stuff and felt that there was no need to do anything more for this kid other than love him. And that might have been enough for grandma. But to get through the everyday experiences that this kid needed to get through, the parents needed more extraordinary parenting skills. And so part of our task was helping the parents help grandma accept the parent training program. And that's where clinician factors come into play, and where good clinical skill and finesse is important. And part of being a psychologist or a clinician in this context was helping this mom learn how to help grandma see the value of following through and being consistent with the behavioral strategies we were recommending in RUBI Parent Training. And they did that. One of the last months we were able to travel, I was on the shuttle at the airport, and I hear, Dr. Butter, Dr. Butter. I turned around, and it's his family. And they told me that they've got grandma at this point coming up with her own reinforcement targets, right? So they got to the point where a few years later, not only was the child doing well, but they also had grandma doing well. All right, next. So this is what the parent training program looks like. When we designed this parent training program, we wanted it to be available to everybody. We wanted to create a manual that would allow it to be disseminated. Exactly how to do this parent training program is written word for word, literally a script. You're not meant to read it, but the idea is that if you're a clinician implementing RUBI Parent Training, there is no question when you have the manual how you're supposed to do it. Of course, we want people to find their own words, but we tell you what our words were, so you know what we intended. The manual was sold by Oxford. Our intention was not to build a publishing empire, but was to make these widely available, and Oxford has done that for us. You can buy them at Amazon if you're interested. Next. These are all the folks who were PIs or significant scientific contributors at a number of universities across the 20 years or so that took us to develop RUBI Parent Training. I won't name people by names. Maybe you'll recognize some friends. Maybe you'll recognize some legends in the field. Some of these people were my most cherished mentors. Next. These are some of the research grants that help fund RUBI. This isn't all of them, but these are the ones that have really provided the largest and most support, recognizing that this has come through a number of clinical trials and a number of grant mechanisms. Next. Why parent training? Well, first is it is a traditionally time-limited approach. You don't have to do it forever. You can make gains in a few hours a week. It emphasizes the role of parents as the agent of change, as the lever of change, as the person who spends the most time with the child, who can probably make the biggest impact, the person who's most motivated to make the biggest impact. We have seen evidence-based treatments designed as parent training for lots of different conditions in pediatric behavioral health. And you see a list there of other parent training programs you might be familiar with. We considered using these for autism. All of them fell short in our mind and in practice of really having an impact for families with autism spectrum disorder. So we designed our own program. Next slide. Before we get into telling you more specifically about what RUBI is, I wanted to highlight just a little bit about why target parents from a parent perspective. One is disruptive behaviors are a significant co-occurring condition in autism. Greater than 50% of families report problems with irritability, tantrums, aggression, self-injury. We know that kids with autism spectrum disorders do have an adaptive skill deficit. There's a gap between what we expect them to be able to do and what they actually do, what they can do versus what they do. And RUBI can help us close that gap, we believe. And at least we think parent training could, and we hope that RUBI could, and it turns out it can. The other thing that we appreciate is that there is a high amount of parent stress and accommodation that happens in everyday life just to get by. Amy, my partner in crime here, often talks about how a child's world gets smaller because of disruptive behaviors. What that does to parents is it creates lots of limits and accommodations and stress that makes the parents' world and the family's world much smaller than it otherwise would be. Parent training has a way, hopefully, of opening that up. And then, as I said earlier, it puts parents in the center of treatment and includes them in the treatment. And Amy, I wanted to give you a few words here to sort of talk about your experience and observation about parent training and parent inclusion.
Yeah, I think it's the great aspect of RUBI. Like, parents carry on the work with the child, and they're going to carry it on not just for the next session, but for life, and they can also provide training and information to other family members so that it's consistent across a lot of adults and a lot of people that are going to be in that child's life. Parents are the center of a child's world, so they having the access to learn and build these skills takes them on to other challenges that might come forward as a child grows.
Great, so lots of good reasons to do this, lots of good reasons to do this with parents. Now let's talk about the science. Next. So our seminal publication came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association. You see lots of authors there, but the real neat thing about this is we published a completely behavioral trial comparing two types of parent interventions, parent-oriented, parent-mediated interventions to each other. Not a drug in sight, right? And we got that published in JAMA. We're really proud of that accomplishment. Let me show you a little bit about what the data has to say. Next. Remember, the whole goal here was to reduce challenging behaviors and to increase adaptive skills. I'm only going to show you data related to one of our outcome measures, which really tries to capture noncompliance, tantrums, aggression, problems with transitions and daily routines. We also measured other ways of measuring adaptive or disruptive behaviors, as well as expanding adaptive behaviors. And you can look at our research to understand that, but I have time to show you just one piece of data. Next. Which is showing you our aberrant behavior checklist irritability scale. And what you see here is that in the orange line, you're seeing a greater reduction over the 6 months of treatment in RUBI Parent Training compared to the Parent Education Program, which was our active control. Essentially, parents in the Parent Education Program got all the same time, but really different content. The content wasn't focused on decreasing disruptive behaviors. The focus was on teaching them and talking to them about what it means to have a child with autism. It was really psychoeducation. It was well designed. And as you can see, it improved outcomes for kids, not just on this irritability scale, but on our other outcomes as well. So that's great. But we actually had a significant separation between the parents who had parent training versus the one who had parent education, really highlighting for us that parent training was a preferred treatment. Next. So let's talk a little bit about RUBI in practice. What does it look like in the clinic? What does it look like for families? Next. I want to just highlight a case that my colleagues and I often present in our training programs. This case is something that Kieran Beers, one of my colleagues, brings from her clinical records, but they could have come from mine or any other certified RUBI therapist who's been doing this a while. 6-year-old boy, has an IQ of 47 and an adaptive behavior profile commensurate with that. He lives with his biological parents. Significant non-compliance. You can see the kinds of things that he's non-compliant with. None of those things would surprise anyone who's worked with a young child with autism. He has a certain amount of rigidities. In particular, he wants all the doors closed in the house. That could make lots of siblings mad, right? There's mild levels of physical aggression, involves pushing, and it occurs maybe a couple times a week. And there's some self-injurious behavior where he might bite himself. So this isn't the worst presentation of kids, but can you imagine this 6-year-old, a 12-year-old untreated? Right now we're starting to see more complex and more severe behaviors that might go untreated or poorly treated over time. And you start to see RUBI Parent Training not just as a treatment or intervention, but if you can imagine and visualize this kid's future self, 6 or 7 or 8 years in the future, you can imagine how this could be worse. If we can get an effective treatment in place at age 6, can we avoid that outcome? And I think the answer is probably yes. Next slide. Like a lot of things, the natural course of RUBI Parent Training can go lots of different directions. This case sputtered at first. A lot of focus on spending time on building his compliance with getting his glasses on. Parents thought that was important, so they spent a lot of time doing that. But after having a couple intervention targets under their belt, this family started to hit their stride by about week 4. We started to implement a number of reinforcement techniques, visual structure techniques, so using a visual schedule. We started using different kind of prevention techniques, such as really clearly implementing practice times during the course of the schedule for wearing his glasses. We used a functional communication approach in a more expanded way. We focused on toileting and built compliance with that zone of development. And we were addressing more stubborn behaviors, in particular his insistence upon going in and out of the refrigerator. And we use planned ignoring for that. And once a number of skills started to come together, these parents started to see progress. Next slide. And you can see here, just look at that ABC line from baseline to follow-up. A high score of 18 will get you enrolled in any clinical trial that we do, right? It might even get you to be a candidate for a prescription medication like an atypical antipsychotic. By the time we were done with RUBI, and even at follow-up, once RUBI was done, this child really had negligible measurement of or signal of irritable behaviors. You can take a quick look at some of the other measures. I don't have time to go into what they are, but you can see that we essentially on other measures of compliance, like the home situations questionnaire, we saw significant decreases in noncompliance in this one case study. But this case study is emblematic of so many of the cases that we see. This works, and it works for kids with autism who have disruptive behavior. Next. So what is RUBI? And I'm going to divide this part of the talk up into a couple pieces. Next. 11 core sessions, you can see them listed there. These are all the sort of basic techniques of intervention with behavior analysis. You can see that we have some home visits and telephone boosters. We try to stay connected with people even after the first 11 core sessions. And then we have supplemental sessions that clinicians can pull in if the parents say they want to address those issues. So it could be toileting, feeding, sleep problems. We never teach timeout unless it seems really indicated our parents want to do it, or if they're already doing it, we need to fix what they're doing and because they want to keep it. Timeout is not a big part of this program. Punishment is not a big part of this program. We also teach a crisis management session. We have token economies or contingency contracting we could pull in. But it is very specified and applied to the kinds of problems that we see in kids with autism. Next. Some of the common elements in this program compared to other behavioral parent training programs for kids, things like planned ignoring, timeout if we use it, compliance training, but our compliance training model is very geared toward kids with autism, and I think works better than others in other behavioral parent training programs. We spend a couple sessions on reinforcement contingencies, like other behavioral parent training programs do. And we spend a lot of time also helping parents recognize that they've been running so fast and so hard, trying to address all the issues around raising a kid with autism, that they might just sometimes not have enough time to play with their kids. We help them think about how they can build that special time back into their lives. But that is nothing special. That's nothing new under the sun. All these things in these blue boxes has been done in other behavioral parent training programs for generations. We take those and apply them and create nuance for autism, but not terribly anything special. But what is special? What are the unique elements? Let's talk about those. One unique element is an emphasis on setting events. Recognizing, behavior analysis doesn't have to be this cold, unfeeling, uninformed approach to changing a child's behavior. It's about helping a child live a better quality of life. And you have to start by understanding where the child is every day. And like all of us, we might have had a bad night of sleep. I was nervous about the presentation. I didn't sleep very well last night. I woke up a little grumpy this morning. Amy had to deal with me at 8 a.m. I was grumpy, right? And she probably knew better than to give me a new problem. She said, I'm going to hold back that problem today because he's grumpy, right? We have to approach our kids the same way. Just because we have a great behavior plan, today may not be the day to implement it, given what's going on in the child's life, right? Whether it's they have a headache, they got a cold, they had a bad night of sleep, they've had a med adjustment, they're hungry, right? We have to teach parents to appreciate where their child is and try to see the world through their child's eyes. And so we emphasize teaching setting events. The other thing that we do is we teach noncompliance from the perspective that the symptoms of autism might be impacting or creating or be the root of the noncompliance, specifically an insistence on sameness, rigid or ritualistic behaviors, and anxiety. Next. Another element is that there's an emphasis on skill acquisition, teaching new skills. I once taught a kid in RUBI how to tie his shoes at age 13. And it had been an IEP goal for 6 years. And I did it in a matter of 3 minutes. Now, granted, I benefited from all the attempts of all those teachers and parents' time trying to teach this kid to tie his shoes. But because I used a backward chaining technique and I taught the parent and the teacher how to use a backward chaining technique to teach this skill, the child was ready. He saw them trying to teach him for 6 years every day how to tie his shoes, but he just wasn't structured in the right way to do it. Direct instruction, behavioral teaching was able to do that in a matter of seconds for this child and his two teachers, his parent and his classroom teacher. Next. There's also an emphasis on identifying the function of behavior. Really, functions of behavior are the reasons why kids do things. And it really comes down to 4 things. They do it to get away from something they don't want to do. They do it because they want to get something. They do it because they want attention, or they do it because it just feels good. And the truth is, some behaviors might be multiply determined. You might both want to get something and avoid something at the same time. Like if I'm watching TV, I'm not doing homework, right? So getting out of doing homework and being able to watch TV is a win-win for me. So it's both escape and tangible. We try to teach parents how to think functionally, and we aren't afraid of using that word, but we also don't use that word if it turns parents off. We want to get to the root of the behavior. We want to understand why the child's behaving this way. And we don't let our assumptions be true. We want data to drive this, and we teach parents to understand that. And then we teach parents, whenever you feel stuck, whenever you feel completely stuck for one reason or another, then we want to go back to session 1, where we talk about the functions of behavior. And let's reanalyze that. Next. The way we do that is we teach people the 3-term contingency and behavior analysis, antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And we spend the whole first session doing that. Next. We also help parents identify that you could have the exact same behavioral set of circumstances as in both these examples. Notice they're exactly the same. Kid throws a paper airplane, talks to his neighbors, makes disruptive noises. teacher sends the child to the principal's office, but you don't know why the kid's behaving this way. There isn't enough context here for us to understand that. More analysis needs to be done. Can you imagine that the kid doesn't like being in the classroom and getting sent to the principal's office is actually preferred than sitting in the classroom? And the way to do that is to throw paper airplanes, talk to your neighbor, make disruptive noises. Yes, I can imagine something like that. I was that kid up through 6th grade, right? But then the other scenario is possible. It could just be a class clown. I wasn't that kid. Amy was, right? The class clown who just wants to make other kids laugh, who wants to get the teacher's attention. Same behavior maintained by different contingencies. And we want parents to appreciate that they have to do that work and understand it. And then if they're implementing a behavioral intervention and it's not working, it's probably because they have the function wrong. Next. A few other sort of unique elements to RUBI. One is this idea of antecedent management approaches, things that any autism provider knows. We use things like first then boards. We use timers to help signal transitions. We use visual schedules. Next. Other things that we focus on is really helping parents appreciate the value of implied behavior contingencies. We want to make sure that things are not in any way assumed. We make things as explicit as possible. You don't assume the child knows what you think they should do. We also focus on functional communication in a heavy way for any child, even if they have fully functional verbal skills, and certainly to kids who are minimally verbal. We focus on generalization and maintenance. In the last session, it's the topic, but it's not the first time you talked about it. You're actually talking about it in the first session. So the idea is that we're trying to teach parents to be independent with these skills long-term and to help other people in the child's life, a disaffected grandmother, a teacher, a school bus driver, whoever else can hear and absorb these behavioral strategies that we teach the parents. Next. One of the key elements in RUBI Parent Training is that it is co-constructed. We focus on what the family wants to do, and we help the parents, we invite the parents into helping us design what interventions we're going to pick. And that cuts across lots of things. We consider the family's needs, we consider the child's age and functioning level, we consider the target behaviors that the parent or child helps us identify. Parents select the homework assignment every week. And if there are challenges or barriers to implementing it, we don't punish the parents. We don't want them to not come in if they didn't do their homework. We want them to come in and tell us how hard it was. And then we could partner with them to try to make it easier the next week. Next. So homework is central to change. We want parents to practice every week. Homework choices come from standard prompts, but they are really co-constructed with the parent. We want parents to pick a target strategy that we teach each session, because we teach more than one, but they get to pick which one they want to use. And we also ask parents to identify the specific behavioral target that they're going to work on that session. Next. All this gets put onto a behavior support plan. Each week, we're adding to that behavior support plan. At the end of the week, you have a thick document. I'm sorry, at the end of the RUBI Parent Training Program, you have a thick document that includes all the interventions we tried and all the ones that didn't work, and all the ways in which we tried to fix it, and all the ways in which they finally did start to work. Next. Maybe I think this is where I'm turning it over to you, right?
Yep, I'm going to take it here from you,
Cool.
and then I'll hand it back over to you in a minute. So one of the things that we talk about is that RUBI can have a tremendous impact on a child and the family, and it works to improve the relationship between the parent and the child. But we need to have some understanding of families before we begin a treatment pathway that's going to require multiple appointments, targeted attention, and homework from a family. I think it's really important to remember that when a child receives a diagnosis of autism, the entire family receives that diagnosis. There's a lot of implications with that. The RUBI approach does not just focus on the child, but it provides guidance and teaches the entire family system on strategies to work through behaviors. I think, for me, I think it guides families to think about their own reactions and interactions with the child and how these can increase positive behaviors and also decrease negative behaviors. There are several things that we may see in parent training. I think families come in already feeling defeated with thoughts of not being able to manage their child's behavior or not parenting correctly. I mean, often they will come to appointments feeling defensive or feeling the blame from others. I think for me, the first thing I reacted to with RUBI was the term parent training, and I'll admit I was really sensitive to any treatment where it inferred that I needed to be trained on how to parent my child. But what I came to realize with RUBI is that it was really about improving my understanding of behavior and building skills for managing that behavior and maintaining that behavior over time. So it really was about building my toolbox so that I could carry that with me into the future with my son. I think in addition to the pitfalls that I just talked about with parent training, I think there's so many stressors on families that need to be considered. And these range from tensions between family members, ongoing care navigation, managing day-to-day schedules, to money, sleep deprivation that Eric talked about. And with COVID, this has only been exacerbated to now include home education responsibilities, managing free time, building leisure skills, which is something we're hearing from a lot of our families. And this list can become really exhaustive. I think a primary focus for many families is building those strong care teams for their child. So I wanted to show you on the next few slides what the life of raising a child with autism can look like. And there are multiple disciplines working to impact the education, health, and life trajectories of a child with autism. So as you're going to see in this example, this is my family, and this is sort of our plan that we put around Henry. So Henry's in the middle of this, and it's a snapshot of his life when he was about 14 years old. And at one point, we had 42 people that were part of his care team. So they all popped into one of these buckets. So this included his primary care providers, psychology and behavior management professionals, teachers, one-on-one aides, specialists for sleep and nutrition. He had county board staff and transition specialists. We had large community team members that we worked with who helped to build life opportunity access, through dance and art and kayaking and learning how to ride a bike and so much more, and so important to us. It also included dentists and his dental hygienist who really worked with us to help him get him into braces. Social work was a big part of that, and counselors who really kind of kept us grounded and focused when we became really overwhelmed. But they all helped us to build a pathway to achieving lifelong goals and success for Henry. So for the clinicians that are here today, I think the goal, the thing I want to impress upon you is that, remember, families are managing these huge care teams while also holding full-time jobs, raising other children, coping with all the stressors I noted earlier, as well as managing the financial impact of raising a child with autism. So when a parent's not following through on assigned homework or, attending appointments, remember, they're likely managing a lot, and likely this is coming down to just one parent. So in my case, it would typically have been me. I think another way I'd like to show this is I like to put the time commitment on top of this, because again, I think it sort of shows the amount of time that families are putting into managing these large care teams. So during the year that I just referenced, we went to 131 appointments. It totaled 262 hours to manage the programming, treatment, and care for Henry. And this did not include the drive time, the extra appointments that were needed, home programming that we engaged in, or any of the care needs of our other child. In fact, she typically would tag along and was a part of all of these appointments because she was young and couldn't stay at home at the time. So if you want to break this down even further, I went to one appointment every 52.7 hours. So again, when families seemed really overwhelmed, or they're not following through on homework, they're not showing up for appointments, they seem to be struggling with treatment plans or implementation, just remember they're managing a lot. And sometimes it's good to step back and go, how are you doing? Where are you? And what can we focus on? What's manageable for you right now? I think caregivers, like Eric said, play an integral part of the RUBI model. They learn and they apply the techniques at home. They collect data. They share back all that information to clinicians so that you can, continue the progress of RUBI. It's also really important to remember that caregivers can include not just parents. It could be grandparents, extended family members. In our case, Henry's sibling was often a big part of the process because she wanted to be, and she was incredibly helpful. And I think also when conceptualizing the RUBI model systematically, the focus is not on fixing the behavior, but also on identifying the dynamics of the family system that could be contributing to the onset of the identified behavior of concern. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. I think identifying those family patterns and triggers can impact the long-term changes in behavior. It's something that we've definitely found in our family. I think also for clinicians, taking the time in understanding and engaging with the family to build a therapeutic alliance of trust and comfort is really key, especially when you're dealing with a family who's got challenging behaviors. I think identifying the relationship as being collaborative, we're all partners in care, we're all partners in building goals is really necessary. Engaging the family, meeting them where they are, like Eric said, and identify them as part of the care team is so important in this process. Families know their child the best, and that is a great place to draw the most knowledge from and the most information from as you start to do a RUBI process with a family. I think also I would say to families, it's really important to understand that the time you have with your RUBI certified provider is sort of precious. I mean, it's time for you to ask questions, practice techniques and strategies that you're going to be using at home. It's also the opportunity for you to really build a partnership with somebody who's equally invested in helping you manage your child's behavior. This is a time to be open. This is a time to be honest. This is a time to tell all the details so they really can see where you're coming from. And that way they can help you sort of plan the goals, set the goals, and then work toward managing that behavior. And again, I always say that the skills that you're going to build them for life. I use planned ignoring with my husband on a regular basis. So there's a skill you should definitely look into. I think as you see families in clinic, again, these are basics, but I always like to just review them. Schedule extra time as possible to review learning and provide supports. Take time to listen and answer questions. Again, value each family member's role and perspective during the visit. There's so much valuable information to be learned when you understand the key players in a child's life on their RUBI team. So really listen to those people that are coming through the door, or maybe you're on the Zoom camera. I think prioritizing next step for families. Remember, we are completely overwhelmed on many days. So if you can help to prioritize and say, these are the things you need to do, it can be really helpful. Give us extra worksheets, those kinds of things, and always celebrate the successes, because it really helps to re-emphasize with us that we're doing good work, we're making impact, and we're having good effect on our child. I think also when creating a therapeutic alliance with a family, it's really important to pay attention to cultural considerations. So I have a few up here on the slide for you to see. You need to look at primary language, country of origin, immigration status, religious beliefs, and so much more. And we're sort of learning here at our institution to look at culture more broadly, which means sort of exploring the child and the family's social location, because it's always different for every person. And it's, and you want to see what barriers might be wrapped up in that. Then I also wanted to highlight, just when engaging with families, again, it's critical to be mindful of the parent's level of stress and how that might be impacting engagement, especially right now with all the global changes that are happening in our world. It can be really easy to get the perception that a family is not interested or not motivated enough to do the work or their homework, but more times than not, there's probably a barrier that's impacting that. So again, I think identifying barriers, following through, being flexible, offering care coordination, and most of all, encouraging families to take time for their own self-care can really help you go a long way in your sessions with them. And then I think also with RUBI, you need to encourage families, right? So you need to say things like, we are partners in care. What you bring is equals what I bring to the table, and between us, we're going to build a really great program. But I think also as they're going through the process, saying things like, you can do this, you're doing a great job, you're asking great questions. And then I think always remind them that as they make progress, that they're really building skills for life. So these aren't things that are just going to be for now, for this month, for the next few weeks. It's really for life that these skills can be used. Eric, I think I'm going to throw it back to you.
Sure, yeah, and just in our last few slides, in our last 4.5 minutes or so, just want to sort of drive home why. I think we've told you what RUBI is, and hopefully you've bought into the idea about why we would do it. Now, what's it been like to use ECHO to help disseminate it? Well, this is our cast of characters. This is what our ECHO team looks like. As you can see, there are multiple behavioral health care disciplines represented here. Everyone brings something to the table. Chaz Albright is a psychologist, but he's a school psychologist, so he brings a perspective for school. Sabrina Long's a social worker. She brings a perspective that talks about resources and the impacts of economic marginalization. Sapna Shetty is a marriage and family therapist, brings that idea of the family systems, and that this is more about the family changing than us trying to change the child. Barb is an expert in evidence-based treatment dissemination, and so she's an excellent component on this. And of course, Amy, as our parent mentor and parent professional and parent perspective, helps bring that voice into the conversation. Next. Just to give you a little bit of data on where we've been and what we've accomplished so far, we have 91 participants that have come through ECHO RUBI trainings. The average years in practice, these aren't newbies, right? These are people who are experienced clinicians ready to roll with an evidence-based treatment, but they've decided they want to spend some time learning how to do that in a learning collaborative in a community with other people. You can see that we have wide array of disciplines represented from about 21% social workers, 36% psychologists, 20% behavior analysts, 30% are physicians or other allied health professionals or early intervention specialists. When people started this, they had limited or no familiarity with RUBI. Next. When they were done, 86% of our participants are telling us that they feel like they've learned a best practice for care in autism. They feel like they've improved their ability to care for children with autism in their practice. 100% respected the professional advice, the community of learning that we created in RUBI. And then what you can see there in the dot graph is clinician self-efficacy. How empowered do they feel to treat kids with autism and disruptive behaviors? And you can see that we have a significant separation over time from their pre-Echo RUBI self-efficacy ratings to their post self-efficacy ratings. And you can see they can't quit us. In that quote at the bottom, one of our current Echo RUBI participants is saying, can we keep doing this even though we're coming close to graduation? Is there something else? We want to keep meeting. That's very flattering. We're really pleased to hear that. Next. Some things that are coming that we're looking for ways to integrate. We have a digital therapeutic that we've developed called Attend Behavior. It's downloadable from the Apple iStore or App Store, from the Android store. There's a web portal that parents can use. It creates an interactive experience between the clinician who's doing RUBI and the parent. It allows people to collect data. It allows the clinician to see that data. It allows the clinician to create nudges for the parent to use the behavioral techniques that they've been teaching. It allows interactivity and messaging in the app to help support problem solving during the course of the week. It has short cartoon videos that show parents how to do the techniques that we discussed in the RUBI session. We're really excited about what Attend Behavior can do to expand our reach with RUBI. And we haven't introduced it to our Echo RUBI participants yet, but we're getting close. Next.
Eric, I would just say on Attend Behavior, I'm also, just so you know, I'm sort of demoing it right now, and I absolutely love it. Of all the apps I've ever used, I find it absolutely phenomenally laid out. So I'm excited about the progress with that.
Excellent. And real quick, we really do recognize that we want RUBI to be available to all. Anyone can buy a manual, anyone can do it. If you come and you do Echo RUBI, you're going to learn how to do it better and faster and in a community of learners. You're still not a certified RUBI therapist when you do Echo RUBI. You're about a third of the way through becoming a certified therapist. If you want to become a certified therapist, which means you've earned the right to train other people, maybe develop your own Echo RUBIs for community providers, then you have to go through a more elaborated training. And that requires more consultation and small group learning and truly becoming a RUBI expert like any of the ones who are part of our Echo RUBI Hub right now. Next. And finally, if any of you are geeks and want to read a book that is more theoretically based than practically based, our manuals are for clinicians, and our parent training book published by the American Psychological Association covers the current literature, at least up through 2019, on parent training. And so just a resource there for those of you who are more researchers or interested in the theory behind this. There's a particular chapter there that a colleague of mine wrote. I just helped her, chapter 3 on parent engagement. That's been really useful to us in the context of building our RUBI. Thank you all for your time and attention. Really appreciate the opportunity to present today.